Hey there, you guys. Welcome back to your algebra class. Today we're going to continue with solving multi-step equations, but this time we're going to have variables on both sides. So the first step again is to just draw your border. The second step is if there are parentheses, you need to remove them by distributing. So you guys already know how to do that. That's when you draw the arrows and multiply. The next step is to clean up each side of the border by combining like terms. So I'm just going to abbreviate here, combining like terms. Then we move the letters to the left. Letters to the left, which are our variables, which are those V's, and we move the number or our constant to the right. Okay, so we want our V's and our C's on different sides of the equal sign. And the last step is to either divide or multiply to get the variable completely alone so that we can isolate our variable. Most of the time, we are going to divide. In today's examples, it's always going to be to divide. So let's go ahead and get some examples in. So step 1 is to draw your border. Step 2 is to distribute if you have parentheses. But if you notice, we do not have parentheses, so I don't have to distribute. Step 3 is to clean up each side of the border by combining like terms. So let me label my variables and my constants for me to be able to do this. And if you notice, I don't have any variables or constants together. They are both on different sides of the equals. I have a variable and constant on the left and a variable and constant on the right, so I cannot combine like terms. Step 4 is to move the letters to the left. I want my variables on one side. Remember, my end goal is still V equals C. If you end up with C equals V, that's okay too. All right, but for today's examples, I'm just going to do V equals C for each problem. So I'm going to move my variable to the left. I don't want this V, this 3x over here. So I'm going to use, again, inverse operations. Remember, once I start my mission to isolate the variable, I'm always doing inverse operations. So the opposite of this positive 3x is to subtract 3x. And what I do to one side, I have to do to the other. 5x minus 3x is 2x. And then 3x minus 3x is 0, so that became a 0 pair. And now I bring down my constants. Plus 2 equals a positive 8. Again, inverse operations. For my mission to isolate the variable, I have a plus 2 there. So the opposite would be to subtract 2. On both sides. 2 minus 2 gives me my 0 pair. So I am left with 2x equals 6. And last time I am going to use inverse operations on this problem. Opposite of 2 times x is to divide by 2. I get my invisible 1, x equals 3 is my solution. So as you can see, it's very similar to what we did before, but now I have that extra step, which is step number 4, to move my variable to the left, my letters to the left. So I draw my border here. This time I do have parentheses, so I need to distribute. Here's my invisible 1. Negative 1 times negative 8r is a positive 8r. Negative 1 times negative 4 is a positive 4. And then I bring down everything on the left side because I did not have to distribute there. Okay, so since I'm done with step 2, which was to distribute. I'm going to move on to step 3, which tells me to combine like terms. But first, I'm going to label my variables and my constants. And as you can see, there is nothing for me to combine because everybody is separated by my equal sign. So now I can go on to step 4, which is my new step. And I move my letters to the left. So I need this variable on the right side. So I use inverse operations. This 8r is positive. So I'm going to subtract 8r on both sides. And when I do that on the left, I get a negative 2r. This becomes a 0 pair. And I can bring down my constants. Plus 10 equals 4. Next, I need to move my constants, my numbers, to the right by using inverse operations. The opposite of plus 10 is to subtract 10. There's my 0 pair. So now I have negative 2r is equal to 4 minus 10, which is negative 6. And my last step is again to use inverse operations, divide by negative 2, divide by negative 2, because remember what we do to one side, we have to do to the other. And so my final solution is r is equal to negative 6 divided by negative 2, which is a positive 3. Okay, next problem. I know that was a lot, but it's okay. Y'all are smart. You will be able to do this no problem. All right, next problem. First step was to draw my border. I did that. Next step is to distribute if there are parentheses, but I do not have parentheses, so I can move on to step 3, which is to combine like terms. So let me label my variables and my constants. And if you can see, there is nothing for me to combine. So I can move on to my new step for this video, which is step 4. Move my letters to the left and my numbers to the right. So this 2D, I need to move it to the left using inverse operations. The opposite of a positive 2D is to subtract 2D. What I do to one side, I have to do to the other. Now, one thing I forgot to point out is notice that I'm not writing minus 2D here under the 10 because I'm not subtracting it from 10. I'm subtracting it from the term that has a variable, which is 7D. So make sure you are aligning things correctly. 7D minus 2D is 5D. 2D minus 2D became 0. There's my 0 pair. So now I bring down my constants. Bring down my plus 10 equals negative 25. So now I'm still using inverse operations to get my variable alone. I'm trying to isolate the variable. So the opposite of this plus 10 is to subtract 10. What I do to one side, I have to do to the other. Keep things nice and neat. So 10 minus 10 is my 0 pair. I bring down my variable on the left, 5D. And then I bring down my constant on the right is equal to negative 35. I continue to isolate my variable because there's that 5 that's in the way. So the opposite is to divide by 5. And that gives me my solution, which is D equals negative 35 divided by 5, which is negative 7. Okay, I know there's a lot of work. As you can see, there is a lot of work. That's why it's really important that you keep your paper as neat as possible. Make sure you're drawing your border like I just did in this next problem. Make sure you are aligning everything correctly. So as you can see, like in this first problem, I did the minus 3x for that first step underneath the 5x. So this is what I'm talking about right now, right here. So make sure you are aligning things correctly. Okay, so now let's go on. We have 2 more problems. There's a lot going on in these 2 problems and they can look very scary, but it's okay. They're not that bad. Okay, I see parentheses and I see parentheses on both sides of the border. So I need to distribute on both sides. Okay, so over here on the left side, I'm going to distribute this 0.25. When I distribute it to 32, that means multiply it, I get 8m. Look at that, it became a beautiful whole number. Then when I distribute it over to negative 60, I get a minus 15. So now the left side doesn't look that bad. Is equal to, I'm going to distribute this negative 2 times m is negative 2m. Negative 2 times 5, that's negative 10. I don't distribute to negative 20 because it's not in the parentheses, so I just bring it down. Now I can go on to step 3, which is to combine like terms. So for that, I'm going to label my variables and I'm going to label my constants to see if there's anything for me to combine. On the left side, I have a v and a c. I can't combine anything, but I can on the right side, this negative 10 minus 20, which becomes negative 30. So I bring down my negative 2m here. So now I have the right side ready. Now I'm going to come to the left. Well, I didn't do anything, so I'm just going to bring it down exactly as I see it. 8m minus 15. And I have my equal sign here in the middle. So now I go to my new step, which is step 4. I move the letters to the left. So this minus negative 2m, I have to bring it to the left by using inverse operations. So this time I need to add. And when I add, I get a positive 10m on the left. I bring down this minus 15 is equal to, this becomes a 0 pair, negative 30. Now it's a really easy 2-step equation. My next step is to move the constant over to the right. So I add 15 and I add 15. And this gives me my 0 pair here. So I have 10m equals negative 15. My last step is to do, again, inverse operations to isolate my variable. So I'm going to divide by 10 and divide by 10. So I ran out of room. I'm going to put it over here on the side. I get m equals, this is actually going to stay as a fraction. So if you put it in as a fraction, it'll give it to you as negative 3 over 2. If you changed it to a decimal, you should have gotten m equals negative 1.5. So both of those would be correct. Last problem here. Almost done. I draw my border to keep things neat. Again, I have 2 sets of parentheses, but be not afraid. Let me go ahead and make this a little bit bigger so that you're just focused on this. You don't get intimidated by all the rest of the problems. So here, my first step is to draw my border, which I did. Next, I need to distribute. So I'm going to distribute this 6 over here. 6 times 0.5n gives me 3n. 6 times negative 2 is negative 12. Equals, I bring down this n, but this negative 0.25 I'm going to distribute. So when I distribute it to 16, I get minus 4. And when I distribute it to this negative 12n, I get plus 3n. If you can't do that in your head, do not worry. Make sure you are using your calculator. Okay, so now I label my variables and I label my constants. And I move on to step 3, which is to combine like terms. And if you notice in this problem, I have 2 variables, but on the right side, I have 1n here plus 3n. So when I combine those, I get 4n. And there's nothing else for me to combine, so I just bring down my minus 4, my constant. On the left side, there was nothing from the start for me to combine, so I bring down 3n, and I bring down minus 12. Okay, whew, I can breathe. This looks a lot easier now. Step 4, which is my new step, move my letters to the left. So I'm going to subtract 4n on both sides. The right side became a 0 pair. 3 minus 4 is negative 1n. I bring down the minus 12 and the negative 4, bring down my constants. So now I'm still trying to isolate the variable using inverse operations. I need to move my constant over by doing the opposite. The opposite of minus 12 is to add 12. What I do to one side, I have to do to the other. This becomes my 0 pair. On the left side, I have now negative 1n. And on the right side, I have a positive 8. Now, this is a negative 1, so it's not an invisible one this time because of that negative. So I have to use my inverse operations and divide by negative 1. What I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So now I'm left with my solution, which is n is equal to negative 8. So I hope this video helps. If not, you can go ahead and go to your teacher's office hours.